Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are having a good night. Um, Decided to play around with some different topics for upcoming editions of Victory Never Sleeps. And one thing we're going to be doing and kind of splicing in to mix it up a little bit with our shows focused on the gods are going to be some shows focused on our virtues. And tonight's virtue that we're discussing is courage. And there's no one better in the Asatru Folk Assembly to speak to us on courage than our special guest this evening, Gothi Rob Stamm. Welcome, Rob. We're glad you could join us tonight.
Glad to be here.
So one thing is kind of a little bit of inside baseball. AFA is not a democracy, and even in leadership circles, we don't vote on things. But I did put it out there, and I've put it out there to schedule each of our virtue interviews to see which member of AFA leadership the rest of AFA leadership thinks most exemplifies these virtues. And overwhelmingly, Rob was the guy that our folks thought best exemplified courage. So that's high praise. I'll let you know, Rob was the guy I had in mind before I even asked the question. So I certainly concur with that. And yeah, we're excited to have him on. We've got a couple of questions to start off. First question is from Stephen. Define courage within the AFA and the importance for each member to instill this virtue within themselves. So, when asked to define something, it becomes very, almost immediately apparent to try to give examples of courage. That's not really a definition per se. Courage, certainly in an AFA context, is not so much an absence of fearing things, but it's not letting fear dictate your actions, or it's consciously overcoming fear to do right action. And that's part of the Odenshoff motto, to do right and fear no one. So doing right and fearing no one is the essence of what courage within the AFA means. And I think talking about the importance to instill that in our folk is going to come through the rest of the evening's discussions. Rob, how would you define courage, specifically in an Asatru sense?
Well, there's several different kinds of courage. And, I was talking to my brother, who's a combat Marine, and I asked him, I said, were you scared? He said, of course I was scared. I'm not crazy, but I still did my job. And to me, that's courageous. Of course, you're going to be afraid. You're going to be worried. You're going to be scared, but doing it anyway, overcoming that fear and doing what's right. Absolutely. And courage isn't always the easy route. The praise comes afterwards if it comes, but in the moment, it's hard. It's hard to overcome fear. It's hard to overcome our own minds to do what's right, but courage is doing that.
Well, so to more answer the question as far as the importance of each member of the AFA instilling the virtue of courage, there's a reason that it's at the top of our list in the way we're ordering these virtues. Courage is a foundation that adds context and value to all of our other virtues. Courage, in a way, takes idea and puts it into action. It's very easy to have high-minded ideals about many things, but courage is putting that to the test when there's consequence. If there's no consequence, or if there's no risk, then standing behind something, it isn't, it may be good, but it isn't necessarily courageous. Courage comes when there is risk, when there is fear to overcome, yet you stand up to it and overcome it. And it's really the key to all of the values that we hold so very dear in Asatru. And it's something that, to be very honest, and we'll talk about it a little bit more this evening, but I've mentioned this a few times, and our founder, Steve McNallen, diagnosed our people as having a soul sickness. And I think that's very true. One of the biggest consequences of the sickness in our folks' soul is that so many of our folk, especially the younger generations of our folk, severely lack courage. And I don't say that to be disparaging. I say that so we know where we're at and we know how things that we can work on and things that we build, because I want all of us to help each other be strong and overcome. And courage is an area to where a lot of our folk are really suffering right now. I got a couple of other questions lined up. Tony, the King of Cheese, asks, Matt, Rob, how are you two doing tonight? How are you doing, Rob?
I'm doing pretty good. Just getting over a little bit of a cold. Usually post national events, I get a little bit of a chest cold, but it doesn't last long. So happy that's over with. Doing pretty good, and I'm here. So it's good. It's a good Wednesday night.
Well, Tony, I give you the same answer every Wednesday. I'm doing what I love. I'm talking to some of my favorite people. I enjoy talking to you guys, and I look forward to this all week. So I'm doing great. Doing even greater, I suppose, something to throw out. I don't want it to derail our courage conversation, but we are currently in the offering stage to try to acquire the property for Sigerheim. So I'm extra excited about that this evening. Trying to think of the order of these next two questions that kind of came in simultaneous, and I think they cover some of the same ground. And since Nick threw it up there, I'll take a pause for the cause for a second. He threw up the link to the Sigerheim fundraiser. We need you guys' help. Sigerheim is going to be quite an investment, but it's fulfilling the dream of generations. It's a place that many of us are going to build a future. And we'd really appreciate any and all donations you guys can pony up to help make that happen. It's going to make a big difference. I calculated on some numbers, and if every member of the AFA were to donate $41, we would have the down payment on Sigerheim in hand. So it's just kind of putting it a little bit into perspective there. So if you guys can, fantastic. Way to do that's on the link that Nick just sent. Another way to donate to the AFA or to get your questions to the top of the line is to go ahead and join our Entropy channel and interact with us there. You can make donations and you can participate in that super chat function. Would love to see you guys do that. All your donations are very much appreciated. So these next two questions overlap a little bit, but I'm going to ask them both, and maybe you can put a little different spin on the second one, Rob. This one's from Cliff. Hail Gothi Stamm. You are famous in Asatru for your courage when sticking with the Asatru Folk Assembly and your sincerely held religious beliefs after you were doxxed and then terminated from your job as a police officer with the Virginia Division of Capitol Police because of that doxing. For those that are not familiar with this history, can you share what happened that led to the doxing in terms of the protest calling on Governor Ralph Northam to resign, Antifa digging into your background through social media posts, images used, pages liked, tattoos, etc., and what role your affiliation with the AFA played in that doxing? Also, can you share what role the doxing had in your suspension and eventual termination as a police officer, and how much of a role each of these things included in that doxing played in the division's decision?
Sure. It's a pretty long story.
So side note for anybody listening, this came through email, so he has this on his end if he needs to refer to it, because that was a very unwieldy, long question for me to just ask outright.
Okay. So I was a sergeant with the Capitol Police, Virginia Division of Capitol Police, which is a state police agency. And part of our job is to guard the governor, the governor's mansion, and surrounding grounds. And well, Governor Northam had got himself in a little bit of trouble. A picture of him in college, either wearing a Klan outfit or wearing blackface to a Halloween party. We're not sure which one was him, but anyway, of course, there was an uproar over that. So that brought national news media down to the capital of Virginia. It brought daily protests with BLM and Antifa and other folks too. So, as a sergeant, I always wanted to lead from the front, so I was right there in front of the governor's mansion with my guys. I was never the kind that would sit in my office and radio orders. I was right there. And I have a tattoo on my neck, which there it is. It's an anchor now, but about 15 years ago, it was a Gibor rune, which is an Armanen rune. And I had got that covered up because, if you don't really know the Armanen Futhort, you can misinterpret the meaning of that tattoo. And I didn't want to go through that. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to get an anchor over it. I was in the Navy, whatever. And that served me fine for a long time. But the state, they required me to wear a Band-Aid over it while I was on duty. So I had a big old Band-Aid on my neck, and you could see a little bit of ink poking out. But Antifa saw that, and they figured, well, he's hiding something. So they dug in, and I had my nameplate on, so it's not like it was hard to figure out my name. And my name and whatnot was public information anyway. So they started digging into my I don't want to say past, I guess. They just started investigating me. And I'd never really been worried about anything, because I'd never thought, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't need to have my Facebook locked up like Fort Knox. I think I had some kind of privacy settings, but nothing major. And they got in there and they got a hold of, it's kind of funny, actually. One of their pictures that made me the big, bad, evil super Nazi was a picture of me planting flowers with a 2-year-old. But you could see the rune tattoo on my neck. So that was one of the pictures they used in my docs was, look, he's got a rune on his neck. He's a Nazi. Look at him plant flowers with that toddler. Ooh, but I had pictures of, I had the AFA banner on the Facebook profile picture. I had a South Africa Relief Fund page, and I had donated to help whites in South Africa. And of course, that was evidence of me being a white supremacist as well. So donating so some folks can have something to eat, in the camps over in Africa, that makes me a bad person, I guess, in their eyes. Other than that, there was some pictures of me lifting weights in my garage, and, I had a flag that currently German nationalists use. It's not a banned flag in Germany. It was actually designed in the mid 40s after the Nazi era, but I like that flag because it's the Nordic cross in the German flag colors. And that, of course, was evidence that I'm evil as well. And I'm kind of embarrassed of it now because it was so goofy. But I had one of those blue line Punisher flags in there, and they said, look, he's one of those guys, likes the Punisher, and he's a cop. I'm embarrassed of it now because it's goofy, but that was used. And yes, my membership in the AFA was used in my docs pretty heavily. What's funny, though, is the news media, and unfortunately, because they were already there for Ralph, they got a hold of it and it went national and international. But the news media used these two guys years and years and years ago in Richmond that were caught plotting to quote unquote firebomb a Black Baptist church, and they were Asatru. They've never been members of the AFA. In fact, I remember having a conversation with a leader later on, and so yeah, I know who they are. They're crazy. We didn't want anything to do with them. So that's kind of funny that they use these two losers that got caught doing that in Richmond, and they always tie that to Asatru because the media can't tell the difference between Asatru and Asatru Folk Assembly. Now, a lot of times when we want to cultivate that because we're such a great gold standard, but unfortunately, it can work the other way occasionally as well. But anyway, so a lot of people don't realize this, but there are activist journalists that work directly with Antifa. So Antifa wrote this article up, and they put it on their Twitter page and whatnot. And then their ally in the I want to say Washington Post, but I don't want to be 100% because I don't remember perfectly. But it was a national news media organization. So they call the my agency and say, well, would you like to comment? And of course that starts the chain right there. I was brought in and they confronted me with everything, and I said, well, this is ridiculous. It's a federally recognized religion and church. I can get the paperwork for you, and this should be over, and like that I'll be back out on the street. And chiefs of police are politicians. Of course, she says, no, don't want to hear anything more. You're on suspension. It was actually a little embarrassing because they had told me to drive up to headquarters and park in front. And I mean, they took my belt, my gun, my badge, and I had to walk out in front of the building with my badge gone and my gun gone. And but I was on suspension, and excuse me. So they performed an investigation, and I had to come in for questioning. I think I was suspended for, and it was with pay, but I was suspended, I think, 4 or 5 months, where they crawled up my rear end with a magnifying glass and looked at my entire career. And remember, I was a sergeant and I had quite a few years, so nobody's perfect for 10 years, but so meanwhile, the national news media is running with it. I had them show up on my lawn, which was funny. I guess it wasn't funny at the time, but it is now. I just thought about turning the sprinklers on. But when it came time for the suspension, I talked to an attorney, and he advised me to quit. Said, you're not going to beat this. You just got to quit, and that'll, if you resign, it'll save you from having that on your record. And I wasn't going to resign because I didn't do anything wrong. Being a member of a church, donating to help hungry people eat in South Africa, having a tattoo of a rune from 15 years ago, and having a goofy Punisher flag and a German flag in my garage again. And it's not a flag that's illegal in Germany, and anybody who knows about Germany knows that everything's illegal in Germany. I wasn't going to quit. I said, you know what, they can fire me, and then we'll go from there legally. So that's what I did. I did get fired many months later, and I took it to the state arbitration court, which is with state employees. You go before a impartial judge who will hear it out and then make a determination on whether the firing was legal or not. And interestingly, the judge came to the conclusion that yes, the police department did discriminate against me, But because they are a public law enforcement agency and they have a vested interest in public perception, they're allowed to. Which was pretty amazing to me, that conclusion could be come to, that if you're a member of a law enforcement agency, your constitutional rights don't matter anymore. That was a hard lesson to learn. After which I contacted another attorney, and then a second one, and they said, yeah, you have a great case, but I'm going to charge you all the cash up front, and you have to pay for every scrap of paper, every deposition. So we're talking, $30,000 just to get started on justice. And that's no guarantee of a good outcome, and it's years down the road. So I didn't have that. I cashed out my pension, but I wasn't going to spend that on a maybe. So that's kind of where that happened. But I will say this: I'm glad it did. I took risks with my social media and whatnot because I wasn't doing anything wrong, and it was a quote unquote risk, but it's unfortunate that it is a risk. But at the end of the day, I'm glad it happened because it led me to where I am now. That's how I look at it now. Weird works, and it works how it should. And it worked to get me where I am today. It was painful at the time. It was hard at the time, but I stood up for what I believed in. I didn't let the state spook me into submission or talk me into doing something dishonorable. I kept to my guns, and I'm in a happy place now. I'm very happy to not be working in law enforcement anymore. I'm in my early 40s, and I'm gray and the mustache and whatnot. I don't think I would be if it weren't for that, for working in law enforcement for all those years. So
well, I appreciate that. It says a lot, like I said earlier, to stand up for something when there's consequence. So many people are scared and back down when there's not an actual consequence or there's not an actual threat. It's really telling of your character that when consequence did occur, that you stuck by your convictions and by our gods and by the AFA through all of that. That meant a lot to us then. It means a lot to us now, and I think it's the standout reason that your peers think that you are the guy in the AFA that exemplifies courage to the highest degree. As a side note, I want to ask for $41 from each member of the AFA to get that down payment in. Steve Mundy went ahead and put 43 in the kitty. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Cliff also had a follow-up to that question, Rob. As a follow-up, would you do anything differently based on that experience? And what advice can you give those who are concerned that they might be mistreated by family, friends, community, employer, or government resulting from their Asatru Folk Assembly membership?
I don't think I'd do anything different. Like I said, I don't view it as a bad thing. It sucked at the time, but it led me to where I am. So I don't view it as a bad thing anymore. I view it as a necessary thing I had to go through to get where I am. So I don't think I would change that. I wouldn't change anything as far as that goes. I would have saved more money beforehand. I will say that, but as far as advice to others, I'm gonna look. Most people are at very low risk of getting doxxed. They really are. I was in the front of the governor's mansion with national news media, and I wasn't, you know, I had a tattoo on my neck, and I was I was no, um, if I had no tattoos and I had the flat top haircut and the Oakleys like every other badge wearing guy there, I probably wouldn't have even been noticed. You know, so the biggest piece of advice I can be is give you is stay out of the don't get into the hyper political stuff online. It's just it's gonna catch you. Um, and if you're just a member of your church, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. And if you're not out being super visible, you're going to be fine. And like I said, most people, 99% of people don't have much risk because they're not, in those kind of high profile positions. I was arresting Antifa the day before. That's going to get their attention. Most folks just don't have to worry about that. So as long as you're, holding true to our principles and our virtues, and you're just, living Asatru authentically, you don't really have much to worry about.
All right. Well, we got a few more questions here. Katla asks, Rob, can you explain? And this is the one that I was going to say. It's kind of covered by your earlier ones, but you may have something to add on this. Rob, can you explain what happened to you that you were voted to be the embodiment of courage by leadership?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think I stuck to my principles. I didn't let the state bully me, or I could have easily have repudiated the church and said, "Oh, I had no idea," and it was, I was just joining a pagan organization because I love the trees. Any number of things like that, and I might have gotten away with that, but I didn't, because that was BS. I'm very proud Asatruer, and I have been for a long time, and I believe in the gods, and I believe my ancestors smile on me, and I did what was right no matter what. And if my peers recognize me for that, then that's good, and I hope I can be a good example for courage.
Not only that, but while you were going through this, you stepped up to be a folk builder and were an exemplary folk builder. And then you stepped up to be a priest of our gods. And that says a lot. When things were rough for you, rather than running away from it or denouncing and denying it, you embraced it even more and devoted yourself in a huge way towards our church and our gods. And it is much, much appreciated by myself, by your peers, and by our members that know.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Definitely. This is my life's calling.
Well, a lot of people's lives are made better by you embracing that calling. Joe asks, what accomplishments in the face of fear are you both most proud of? A boast. So, Rob, what accomplishments in the face of fear are you most proud of?
Got a couple. One is what I just said. When I was going through a rough time, rather than stick my head in the ground, I stepped up and became a bigger part of the church. I'm pretty proud of that. I love the AFA, and that I can make it better and do work for it. That's amazing. It's an amazing opportunity, and that I did that at a time when others would not have. I'm pretty proud of that. I think that's probably the biggest one. I mean, I've got some other little examples of courage. I was in the Navy. I was a submariner, and the first time you go down, it's a little spooky, but you swallow your fear and you trust that the water's not going to come pouring in. Yeah, I think I already spoke my greatest boast there.
Thinking of myself, any things that I've done that have overcome fear. I suppose there's a couple of them, and these aren't some huge medal-worthy acts of courage, but they're things about myself I'm a little bit proud of. One of them was, and it's hard. It's not just one moment, but it's something that I am proud of. I became the Alsherjargothi of the Asatru Folk Assembly at a very interesting time in the AFA's history, and I suppose in the history of the Western world, just the way things have gone. There was a lot of fear around that time of being straightforward about our beliefs and about the ethnic nature of our faith, about our position on homosexuality and transgenderism and other mental illnesses, and really owning that and standing by it. And there's a big fear to say that out loud. There were winks and nods and hoping it'd be all right, but there was a very big reluctance and fear at the time of saying that up front and out loud. One of the most important things, because I advocated this position when I was the folk builder coordinator, as soon as I became the Alsherjargothi, one of the big things I wanted to do was the infamous white babies posts. And not having it in front of me, I think that it went something like, in the AFA, we're extremely proud of our feminine ladies, our masculine men, and our beautiful white babies. And that's the thing that started the whole Declaration 127, and it threw down the gauntlet to really polarize those of us who believe in Asatru the way that we do, and the other folks that have a progressive social agenda and claim to follow our gods. But it was scary because there's a reason people didn't want to do that before, is, that shook a lot of things up. And it did. We lost members over it. We had members for the wrong reason. And so it was good those people parted ways. But, at that time, one wrong move and there was a very real fear that everything had come crashing down. And it was meaningful to me. We lost some members, but we gained members 2-1 compared to the members that stepped away. And it's been kind of a defining moment in a lot of the progress that we've made. And that means a lot to me. And I'm very committed to doing the right thing as the Alsherjargothi and not just the easy thing. And that can be very difficult sometimes, but it's something that I very much meditate on and focus on because it's so very important to me. Another one, just on a more fun personal note, another two, I guess. Some of you guys may have heard some of this, but I was, a nerdy, not in great shape, nobody in high school and just out of high school. And I'd never been in a fight. I've never really expressed myself in a lot of manly ways at that point. As a child of the 80s, all my role models were these larger than life, pro wrestlers and action superstars. And I would be a fan of that and like to think of myself in that context. But then I looked at my real life and no, you're a loser and you don't do anything. So it was important to me. And I took up a challenge for Thursday night at the fights in Anchorage, a local, amateur boxing deal. And I got challenged by a morning show. A friend of mine was a producer of a morning show up there and called me up out of the blue at, I don't know, 5 a.m. I was asleep, woke me up out of a sleep, and I'm on the radio in front of all of the town, and they challenged me to this boxing match. And I'd never been in a fight. I'd never boxed. I didn't know what I was doing. But I said, yep. I took him up on it, and I went through with it. And it was a setup because it was this radio show, and it was, one of those fun morning shows. So at weigh-ins, there was some other guy that, was completely inexperienced, just like me. And we weighed in. It was going to be a pretty reasonable exchange. But then day of, that guy is sick. And the guy they replaced him with was this tatted up Samoan gangster looking dude that looked like he'd been fighting his whole life. And the bouncer Chip Green was the guy's name. And that man beat me so bad. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to remember it now. He claims that I got some good hits in on him after this fact. I think that's because he was being nice. I spent a lot of time on the mat and a lot of time getting hit in the face. But I'm really proud of myself because I'd never been hit in the face before. And that was my first time getting hit in the face by this 300 plus pound Samoan dude. And I kept getting back up. Like I was not effective, but I kept getting back up, and I went the distance, and it wrecked me pretty good. But I was proud of myself on that. And the other thing, following up on this, again, in the same vein, I wanted to express that martial side of myself a little bit more. And I decided to find the roughest bar in town and jump in there and try to be a bouncer there and see what happened. And, learned so much about myself. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Ended up running security there for a couple of years. And so I was proud of myself. I stepped up on that too, just on a personal note. In the meantime, we've got Sarah threw $3 at us. Sarah, thank you so much for that. Gothi Stamm, in terms of courage, who would you say inspires you?
That's a tough one. There's a lot of examples of courage in our church. I was going to say that the statement that Matt was speaking of was incredibly courageous. A lot of people, because it's so intuitive, people don't really think about how much going out and putting it all out there that was a very courageous statement. And I think making that statement. I think the AFA is better for it, and where we're at now because of it. So Matt is an example there. My fellow Gothi Trent East, he went through a very similar situation as I did, just a few months afterwards, and he, was quite a bit younger than me, and he comported himself in much the same manner. So that's a colleague that I respect and admire his courage as well. Outside of that, my biggest hero ever growing up was my Opa, and he will probably always be my biggest hero and model of courage till I'm an Opa myself. So,
just as kind of a side note there, I think it's certainly worth mentioning. Trent, in that same deal, when I asked all the leaders who the most courageous person was, Trent came in second on that as far as folks' admiration, and rightly so. Trent and one of his buddies ran into some doxing trouble, and their concern, at least as it was expressed when they called me, and these are two young men just starting out their lives, just trying to start out their careers, just starting out things. Their concern in the moment of they're under fire, they wanted to make sure they didn't make me and the AFA look bad. The fact that thought would occur to them when they were going through such a stress personally, that speaks volumes of their character. And it's not the end of why we respect Trent so much, but it's certainly a a good starting point for a lot of folks. But yeah, solid guy. Don Ricardo threw us $10. Thank you, Don. We appreciate it very much. Landon has a question. Why does it seem like everybody that follows Asatru is being persecuted for religious beliefs when this country was founded on a mix of all religions? What do you say to that, Rob?
Well, I say it's a symptom of society as it is now. As Matt said, as coined by our founder, Stephen McNailen, our people have a soul sickness. And it's not because it's a Christian reaction. It really isn't. It's a communist reaction because young people, and especially of our folk, and I say our racial, not as our AFA folk, but white kids are lost. They're growing up largely without parents or maybe without a father. The school system has failed them, and they're being inundated with social messaging on all their social media, all their TV shows, their music, and they adopt these poisonous ideologies. And when something doesn't conform to that ideology, they want to destroy it. I mean, for crying out loud, Candace Owens was called a white supremacist. That's how ridiculous it has gotten, that a black woman who happens to be a conservative, a normie conservative, is called a white supremacist. So folks like us who love our own people and love our culture, that and love everything that we've done over the past couple of thousand years, we're not embarrassed of it. We celebrate our gods, we celebrate our ancestors. Well, that runs very counter to this poisonous ideology. So, that's why it may be in the crosshairs from time to time.
Everything Rob said, absolutely. The progressive left in this country, as you can see, you mentioned the persecution of religions in juxtaposition to the religious tolerance that characterized the foundation of our nation. But the progressive left has done and continues to do everything in their power to reimagine our history, I guess is the term the kids are using these days. They don't have any thought to preserving the intent of the founders of our country or the values that defined America for a very long time. That's part of what they mean by progressive, is by moving beyond all of those things that were valuable to our ancestors and replacing it with the mental illness that they all suffer from. And I think some of that legitimately is misery loves company, and they're miserable people. But to answer your question a little bit better, why does it seem like everybody that follows Asatru is being persecuted? I think because of fear is why it seems like that. Because quite frankly, the vast majority of people who practice Asatru are not being persecuted. They're not suffering consequence. They're not, being excluded from work or excluded from their family. Some people have problems, and some people absolutely are being persecuted. But I think that when that fear floats around in our community, and when everyone repeats it like a game of telephone, it exaggerates it to a degree that that holds us back, because we don't look at it in a sober way. We react to it in a fear reaction. And we've seen that a lot. With the growing pains of the AFA, there's a number of people that, talked a really good game about who they were and what they were about, but they didn't get doxxed. Nothing happened to them. Just the thought that maybe somebody would look at them crossways, they ran for the hills, and they're still hiding as far as I know. We saw that with the folks that we were really relying on to run Thorshoff. Now, fortunately, great people like Rob have stepped up from quite a distance and saved the day, and Thorshoff is functioning amazingly well. But there were people that asked me to get a Hoff there profusely. And the second it became real and they got one, rather than stand with the gods, rather than stand with Thor, they ran and hid. That's unfortunate. We saw the same thing happen at Baldershof. It's one thing, kind of a point I wanted to make is part of that soul sickness. I think it's very, very easy for our people to post Viking memes with a guy in chainmail and a bloody axe and post something about courage and slaying your enemies and whatever. These are often the same people that are very afraid of relatively small social consequences. And this isn't a strike at them, but it's a challenge for all of us to look at our virtues through the lens of 2022 and not through a pretend Viking lens that we're not experiencing. You know, we have guys that, hey, if you need to battle a dragon, I'll be right there with you to slay the dragon. Cool. How about instead you just show up and put your face in a picture and celebrate a religious observance at a hop? Whoa, hey now, I don't want to be in pictures, but next time you see a dragon, you let me know and I'll be there. And as funny as that may sound, unfortunately, that's how a lot of our people conceive stuff. It's one of the reasons that the reenactment clothing thing is something I've tried so hard to stay away from. When we lock our virtues in a time frame that we're so far removed from, we don't make those associations with real life and real actions and our real families. And yeah, so exhibiting virtues in real life is much harder than it is to just talk about them. It's much. Everybody wants to be a gangster till it's time to do gangster stuff. Next question, by the way, 30. Okay, just as a side note, I guess from Nick. By the way, 36 beautiful white babies as of the beginning of this month, and at least 2 or 3 more since then, just that I know of offhand. That's babies born to AFA members. So we're doing good in regards to those. I don't think it was because of my statement per se, but since the White Babies post, had a whole lot of kids born into the Asatru Folk Assembly, and we're certainly blessed to see that. Antonio, I think about asking this question before, but what is your thoughts on the Trough? Rob, do you have thoughts on the Trough?
I don't have a whole lot. I don't have a lot of experience with the modern Trough. I understand it's, what I hear, it's gone way downhill. And that's from a low starting point to begin with. I think in the old times when it was first coming out, they put some decent literature out, Dr. Flowers and whatnot, but I saw a little bit of footage from their online moot or whatever that they do, and it was just, I mean, it was a comedy of errors. So I don't really bother with them because they're just not in my circle. They're not in my world. No, I really don't have a lot of thoughts on them, to be honest.
You know, I think they're really interesting, and I'll give you kind of a breakdown on my thoughts because I think it's a fascinating, just, I guess, organizational study. So they were, until their inception, Alsatru as a faith was inherently folkish. There was no question of that. There was no suggestion that Alsatru was anything other than that. When the original AFA, the Asatru Free Assembly, disbanded in the late 1980s, the Asatru Alliance maintained a folkish position, and the Ring of Trough was founded by Edred Thorson, and it originally was fairly folkish. It was more esoterically inclined than the Alliance was, but it started out fairly conservative. And very quickly, because they had democracy and they had voting, very quickly, their founder, he was removed, and anyone who was, right of center was removed. And over the decade of the 1990s, you watched them degenerate more and more into far left issues. And there was a balance. You had people there that were, it was 90% about Alsatru and 10% about lefty issues. And then, as the decade progressed and it got to 2000, it was, 60% Alsatru and 40% progressive issues. And as you've watched, or as Rob was mentioning, somebody sent me some stills of their online Trough moot that they did. In one aspect, it's funny. It's a freak show, literally. But in another way, it's very sad because it's not just that these people are gross. They are. But they just reek of mental illness. Every one of them needing to specify what their pronouns are, all of them sickly and obese, 50% or more gender confused. It was shocking mental illness. And that comes with now, if you go to their website or you are involved with anything they do in any way, it's 100% lefty issues and 0% Asatru. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. Remember, many of their high read are not Asatru, or certainly that's not their first religion. That may be one of the many that they claim to practice. It's really a strange place, but something else to be said about it. That used to be the AFA's biggest competition in the 90s and as the 2000s were dawning. And in my time being involved with the Asatru Folk Assembly, the Trough has basically disappeared. They've become a complete and total irrelevancy, even when you compare them to other lefty groups that claim to worship our gods. The Trough is kind of in the back of that pack now, and has become completely irrelevant because they no longer are about anything. As an anecdote, when I joined the AFA, it's not like I was seriously considering joining the Trough, but looking at the organizations that were big back then, the AFA, the Asatru Alliance, the Odinic Rite, and the Trough, I've always been very proud that the AFA talked about what we were about, the things we stood for, the things that we loved, the future we wanted to see. When you went to the Trough, and this was, in the early 2000s, when you went to the Trough's website, there were pages after pages of all the things that they don't like and don't stand for and will not tolerate. And you didn't really find out a lot of stuff they supported. You just found out they don't support racism, and they don't support white supremacy, and they don't support ableism, and they don't support this, and they don't support that, and they will not tolerate gender bias and all these extreme lefty positions. But they didn't get around to saying anything that they do love or that they want or that they like or that they celebrate. And I think that's really telling. But no, the Trough as it is now is very, very unwell people, the few people that are still part of that group. And yeah, it's a very, very unhealthy place to be. And it's literally written all over their faces. So Bob says, I know the AFA is against race mixing, which I have no problem with. I wanted to ask if it is wrong if we have been friends with non-whites And if we sometimes meet with old friends who are not all white, you can be friends with whoever you want to be friends with. There's no religious imperative not to have friends of all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think that a great many AFA members probably have friends of different ethnicities. Certainly living in the United States and the communities that we're in, they're very ethnically diverse. And the AFA has never had a position that we need to be unfriendly or hostile to other groups of people. That's simply not one of our religious values. Matter of fact, being a good neighbor and treating other people in a friendly manner until there's some reason not to is something we pride ourselves on. What are your thoughts, Rob?
Same. One of my good friends in college was from India, and her family owned an Indian restaurant, so I got to eat lots of delicious Indian food for nothing. There's nothing that says you can't be friends with someone that's not white. We are not a hate group. We don't hate people. So, yeah. Enough said.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're about an hour in. That is all the questions we have so far. So, guys, if you want some more questions answered, please go ahead and get them out there. It's a good time to remind folks that if you guys want to do any donating or any super chatting, Entropy is where to go, and Nick can throw you up a link. Also, I'll send out a plug for, I know a lot of you guys are excited to get Phrasehoff. I am very excited to get Phrasehoff. First step in getting Phrasehoff is paying off Njordshoff, and we're well on our way to that. I think we're 39% paid off on that. And just as another thing, I ran math. If every member of the AFA donated $160, we would pay off Njordshoff immediately. And I say that just so folks know, Njordshoff is the most expensive Hoff that we've purchased so far. Some of that has to do with just property values in Florida, but we're doing a really good job on paying that off. The quicker we do that, the quicker we will get a Hoff for Freyr. And the Hoff for Freyr, in case you guys, anybody's new to the program or hasn't heard, is going to be in Ohio. So we're very excited to have that for all our Pennsylvania and Ohio folks. Ohio has been just an epicenter of AFA activity in that area. It has grown so much over the past couple of years. It is doing amazing things, and pretty soon we will have a Hoff there, and those folks really deserve it. And I think that'll bring a lot of honor to Freyr. So, Rob, if you could speak to our members about the importance of courage, or what do you see as examples of courage that you would like to see more of in our membership?
Sure. Well, one thing we kind of touched a little bit on, there's different kinds of courage, and there's physical courage, and then there's mental courage, and they're not always the same thing. A lot of folks are definitely ready to get into a fist fight in the bar to protect their buddy, or out in the streets to protect their business or their home. But when it comes to pictures or using your real name, people aren't as courageous. Different kind of courage. And what I'd really like to see is people more willing to put themselves out there and live an authentic life, being in pictures, using their real name, and knowing that if you're doing right, you have nothing to fear. But that little bit of courage is an example to others. There might be someone who's sitting in their home right now and they're afraid to join because they fear that, like we said, that there might be some kind of unforeseen consequence. But if they see a group of people in pictures out there going to moots, people, using their real name online, that might inspire them. Just little tiny acts of courage inspire bigger acts. It might inspire someone to come home to their gods. Big acts of courage that are flashy get to show, but it's the small acts of courage every day that build something.
I think that's really important that you mentioned that. That's the same with so many of our values. I've always said that in terms of victory. Everybody thinks of victory with a big V, like it's the one big sweeping victory that changes everything in the world. But more often than not, it is the culmination of so many small victories that build that staircase towards goals that we have. And the same with courage. Courage isn't a one and done. Courage is a lifestyle choice. Courage is a hard characteristic to instill within yourself. So many people ask about daily practice. One thing that I do, and I mentioned that in daily practice, and I say this, I'm not going to promise you that every single day I do it. That would be dishonest. But when I do, and as often as I can, I like to go before my altar and I talk about things that I reaffirm. One of the things that I make a point of reaffirming is vowing to act courageously and do the right thing, even when it's difficult, because it takes a constant reminder to break that habit. It's so easy to go along and get along. It's very hard to do the right thing sometimes. Always works out better in the end, but in the moment, it's really difficult. So those small acts of courage do make a huge difference. We all of a sudden we got a bunch more questions piling up. Appreciate that, guys. Cliff asks, where'd you get that fine bow tie?
The Evil Empire, Amazon.
So question, did you tie it or is it pre-tied?
No, this one's pre-tied. Cliff's got to call me out.
That's not from Cliff. I asked that one on the pre-tied.
Oh, okay. Matt's got to call me out.
I'll tell you, courage is not always doing the easy thing. It's doing the right thing, Rob. Got to ask the hard questions. Daniel asks, Rob, can you touch on membership support during that difficult time?
Absolutely. It was incredible. While I was on suspension, there was a SARA in the South, and I went, which of course that was used against me too. Antifa said, "Look at him, he's going to their event." It's like, well, of course, I'm a member, But I mean, the support from the membership was incredible. People wanting to come up and talk to me and pat me on the back and offer their support. It was incredible, and it was heartwarming, and it really made me know that I was in the right place. And not just from membership, from leadership as well. I mean, the day that I got suspended, I talked to Matt on the phone, and I was just a regular old member at that time. So, I mean, anybody can talk to Matt, and the outpouring of support from both membership and leadership was very important to carrying me through the day and getting me through a difficult situation. Absolutely. But in the AFA, we take care of each other.
Side note, I don't see all the side chat. Nick is kind enough to sort through and sift through and find the questions and put them up in my special little question box I got. But Shannon, I did see your comment, and thank you. That I can't think of a better compliment. I did see that. Thank you. And you mentioned that you're moving out of Ohio. Where are you moving to? We may have plans for a Hoff in that area too, depending. Brandy asks, I would like to ask the great men on the screen how we can help build courage in our young men and women. If it hasn't been asked, I showed up late to the party. Shame on you. Rob, what are your thoughts on how we can build courage in our young men and women?
Well, our younger folks learn by watching the older folks. Be that shining example of courage, and teach the children from a young age to always stand up for what's right in your beliefs and convictions and never back down. It starts young, and we've got so many children in the AFA that we're going to have a great couple of generations of Asatru adults that have been taught these values from childhood. I think that's the biggest thing: is start young and be an example to others.
I think that's a good time to plug that. It just so happens Gothi Stamm is the dean of the Asatru Academy, which is our AFA homeschooling program. Everything he just said, we're having and we have had this amazing baby boom within the Asatru Folk Assembly, and we're building, and Rob is doing such a good job at taking the lead on it, this program to help educate our kids and to help raise them to be proud and strong and courageous and well-rooted in their faith and in valuable teachings, and not the indoctrination that the public school system is currently engaged in. And I think that's a huge key. Folks, as far as my ideas on things that we can do to help encourage our young men and our young women, everybody wants to know some hocus pocus that's going to fix everything. But the answer to so many of the questions that we get asked on this program is to live nobly, to live Asatru in your daily life. And it helps people who are outside that are considering join. It helps people that don't understand our faith learn to understand it and to appreciate it. And very importantly, it strengthens your fellows, not just the kids, because absolutely the kids see what the adults do. And you can talk at them all day long, but them seeing and observing you living the right way to live makes a deep impact on them. But it also does that to the other adults you surround yourself with. When you act with dignity and with courage, it strengthens other people. So it does a couple of things. And I think this is healthy, and it may not sound like it initially, but it shames cowards. When you act courageously, people who want to take the easy way out and want to do something cowardly are shamed into seeing themselves through a reflection of you and stepping up. And we all need that. We all need examples to compare ourselves to and to try to emulate or to try to outdo. When we're surrounded by courageous people, it's so much easier for us to step up and be courageous. And we can all do that for each other. And I think that seeing those examples is the key to young men and women as they come up to grow into courageous people. And I think that's the plan, and it's a plan over, a generation, but it's working and it's the plan. Shay asks, what gods top the list when it comes to courage and why? What say you, Rob?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the obvious is Tyr, who courageously put his his hand in the wolf's mouth to protect his folk, and the cosmos. That's the biggest shining example that comes immediately to mind. But all the gods at some point or another, there's examples of courage, but that's the big example I can.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. Our gods are the noblest and the best of us. So I think they are all exemplars of courage. Certainly Thor battling the giants and the things that he does are examples of courage. But I think the ultimate example of courage in our gods is Tyr, like Rob said. I think that is the defining characteristic, or certainly one of the defining characteristics that shows Tyr's godliness. Can one go to an AFA event to get an idea of what it's like before becoming an AFA member? Absolutely. So it's important, if you want to do that you reach out to your local folk builder or the folk builder who's, hosting the event that you want to attend. We just like to have a conversation and know who's coming to our events. We've got families and we want to make sure that, people who present a danger are not attending. But reach out to your local folk builder, and they'd be happy to get you set up, let you know anything that you may need to know before you show up. And we always love to have people who are interested show up and see what we're about. We don't want anybody feeling like they got tricked into being part of this. We want people to be happy and confident in their decision to join the AFA. So absolutely. And we would love to have you come out to something and see what you think. What would you suggest for beginning the practice? Rob, what are your suggestions for a complete beginner to start practicing Asatru?
I would pick up one of the, Stephen McNailin's book is certainly a great place to start. That'll give you a very good broad overview and give you some tips on where to start. But I think, and it's been said before, the easiest thing for someone brand new, the easiest transition is to just start talking to your ancestors. Set up an ancestor altar and speak with your ancestors, because that is something that's very real to you and tangible, and it's something you have a close connection with. So ancestor veneration in our religion is one of the easiest things for someone brand spanking new to get started with.
Absolutely. Don says, Tyr, the bravest fettering the chaos wolf, is one of my favorite stories about courage from the lore. What would be one of your favorite stories of courage from the lore? Rob, what's your favorite story of courage from the lore? You can't take the Tyr one.
Oh, because I already said it. Let's see. I've got one, but it's from a saga. Well, it's from the saga of Sigurd. And actually, my daughter, her middle name is named after this lady. Her name's Guthrun. And she was a loyal wife, a loyal mother, a loyal woman. And she got a raw deal because of some magical happenings and whatnot. And she walked into the ocean rather than be disloyal, and stayed true. She stayed true to her heart. She survived it, but she did walk into the ocean rather than compromise her values. And that to me is a shining example of courage. And I'm paraphrasing because it's been a while since I've read it.
So my story is gonna also be not from high Edic lore. My favorite example of courage, and this is a different kind of courage in a way, is the example of King Radbod. And this meant a lot to me when he was one of the heroes that I first became aware of, and it meant a lot to me when I first started in Asatru. He was at a point intellectually to where he could accept that perhaps the Christian God was the only all-powerful God of the universe, and that must be the way things are. And he saw the power and the might of the missionaries and the Christian armies. and he was about ready to get baptized and go through that. And then he asked at the last minute, he said, what, okay, but where are my ancestors? And he was told that his ancestors were burning in hell. And so if you can imagine for a moment, if your mindset is already to the point where you believe that that's real, that the Christian heaven exists and the Christian hell, especially as presented in the medieval times, exists, to where it is an eternity of torture. When he heard that his ancestors, every last one of them, was burning in hell, he stepped out of the baptismal font and said, I'd rather burn in hell with my ancestors than be in heaven with a parcel of beggars. At that moment, when those consequences were very real to him, he chose hellfire over the easy path that took him away from his kin and away from his ancestors. And that's always meant so much to me and still does to this day.
That's a good one.
Antonio, in the AFA, I'm going to try to decipher the question as best I can. In the AFA, what takes on for a relationship with boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife to be perfect? I don't think I heard anyone ask that. Sorry if the question seems confusing. No, that's okay. No problem at all. We appreciate you being here and asking the question. We'll take a swing at it. And if there's a nuance that we missed or there's more you want to it, just go ahead and ask a follow-up, and we'll be happy to get to that too. Rob, what do you got for that question?
I don't think any relationship is perfect. That's just not how humanity works. But I think a good relationship, both people share the same faith. I think that's really big. It's a lot. It takes away a lot of stress from a relationship if you share the same faith and beliefs and worldview, especially when you start having children. And there's no question of, well, we're going to raise the kids this way or that way. It's, well, we're going to raise the kids the way we both are. So I think sharing a faith is a big part of that, to having a good marriage and a good relationship, and takes a lot of stress out. And just being compatible with each other. A lot of young, and I don't mean to bag on young people, because I was young once. I remember how it was. I didn't think, hey, this person shares the same values I do. I said, hey, that person looks hot, or listens to the same kind of music I do. I mean, looking back at it, it's like, wow, that was dumb. If you share the same kind of values and have a lot in common, you enjoy the same activities, all that goes really, really well. And, just make sure you have the same values and some of the same outlook and hobbies and whatnot, and you'll be all right.
I think that Rob hit the nail on the head. The most important thing that, first, I agree, there's no such thing as perfection. I think that there's things we can do to always trend closer and closer to perfection, and we certainly should endeavor to do that. The most important thing is that we are united by our core values. Like Rob said, I was young too. I've been in relationships that didn't work out before, and my wife is awesome, so that has a lot to do with it. But I think one of the reasons that this has worked out so well is that those core values are shared, and Asatru is shared. That gives a very solid foundation, and it's the most important thing because it's all encompassing on who you are and what you believe. Other things are superficial and change, but especially when you have children, like Rob said, that comes into, your priorities in life get dramatically altered, and all of a sudden, things about the future and things about how you want to raise another human being become much more important than taste in music or, looks or whatever. And I'm not saying go out and find an Alsatru that's ugly or something, find somebody that you're attracted to, but building around important things and important values is the key. And it allows for, and I've said this a number of times in this program, it allows for you to build a syncretic, holistic life to where all of the pieces of your life work together instead of pulling different directions. I think that's the best chance to move towards perfection in your relationship. How does the AFA celebrate Halloween? And is there some Norse Germanic celebration in October? Unless I'm mistaken, Halloween is of Irish origin. So the answer to your question is Winter Nights. We believe that Winter Nights is the Norse or Germanic reflection of the same Halloween that you're referring to in Irish tradition. The concept being that at this time of year, the veil between our worlds is the thinnest, and it's a time of spooky magic happening, and it's also a time of better communion with our ancestors. That's why at Winter Nights, the AFA holds Disa Bloat. Our DCR bloat at Winter Nights is intended at this, thinnest veil time of the year for us to interact with our DCR, our female ancestors that look on from beyond. That's kind of the spiritual root of it, and that's what's very important. Winter Nights is so I mentioned this last time, it is the occasion that we celebrate the AFA's, second national event that we started. We were 11 years into our national celebration of Winter Nights here a couple of weeks ago, and I had the honor of attending that in Ohio. But yeah, Winter Nights is our celebration for, what most folks would consider Halloween. And that being said, we also have fun Halloween stuff. That all comes from our paganism and our ancestors. So we'll carve pumpkins and dress up and get candy and do all the fun Halloween things that everybody loves. But we also take that time to build stronger connections with our ancestors and to renew those bonds. And it's the time of the year that some people experience the most magical, most metaphysical happenings in their life, because we're very sensitive to that at this time of the year. Don asks, Gothi Stamm, where do you get your tract? Comments of so many fellow Germans in the AFA and celebrating that culture. My surname, Ricardo, is actually from the German Reichardt, Keller ancestry as well.
Trough or Troughthen. I'm kind of addicted to it. One pair of lederhosen I've had for, I think, 15, 20 years, and I don't remember where I got it. I have a pair of Bundhosen, which they just go just below the knee. They're a little bit longer, and I have a pair of lederhosen that I got from a company in Pennsylvania. They make great stuff. It's called Ernst Licht. They make some awesome stuff, and you can get custom work done. They've got a variety of styles and whatnot. And I've gotten some of my hats from them, and also German Import House, which I believe is GermanImportSpecialty.com. Mike Malilos, the folk builder in Ohio, knows exactly. He was telling me about them as well. They have some really cool stuff. And then I bought my daughter's dirndl from Germany, and I don't remember the name of the company, to be honest.
Brandy says the AFA celebrates many modern and ancient heroes for our days of remembrance. Which of their stories is your favorite? Rob, let's start with you.
Oh, well, as the Grossmeister of the Von List Society, that's got to be at the top, very tippity top of the old list. I follow Meister von List's philosophies and Armanism and Armanin runes. He's got to be at the top of the list. But a very close second is Hermann. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, Hermann, because he stayed true to his folk. He gave up a great life of luxury. I mean, to be a Roman general, he gave up a lot of luxury to fight for his people. And if it weren't for him, I do think the Romans would have gone into Germany. So we owe him a lot.
I already mentioned certainly one of mine with King Radbod. Another hero that I think is worth mentioning is Alexander Rudd Mills. And I think he gets far too little credit or fame for being the first figure I can think of that practiced what we would call modern Asatru. There are a number of starts to that. Meister von List practiced, a pagan German spirituality. I don't think it was developed as close to what Asatru is as it would later become. But Alexander Rudd Mills practiced something that I think folks in the AFA in a lot of ways would very much recognize as a modern practice of Asatru. Now, still at that time, there was very evident the overlap between Christianity and Asatru and, the first struggles with that and putting that in its place. But at a time where he was the only person doing it, certainly the only person in his part of the world in Australia that was doing this. He was able to attract a sizable following. He was able to stand strong in his faith. When the Second World War made that very difficult for him in his country, he ended up getting arrested and detained about that because the other practitioners of the proto Asatru faiths were in the Axis nations. So he was detained for that. He pushed through and he really set a lot of foundations that put this into motion that we all practice today. And he did it without any temptation to LARP or to try to, pretend he was somebody he wasn't. He was a barrister in Australia in the early 1900s to mid 1900s, and he dressed accordingly. He would, he wore a suit and a tie, and he got together well-dressed other of his folk in Australia, and they got crowds and they regularly worshiped our gods. And that was such an important and impactful thing. And I think far too few people know about that today. Nick wants me to remind folks that next month in Oklahoma, we're going to have the AFA's National Feast of the Einherjar celebration. He's posting up the dates on there. If you are interested in attending that would be fantastic. We would love to see you guys there. So get your tickets now, and I'd look forward to seeing you guys next month if you're able to make it. Cliff asks, can you talk about the difference between courageous femininity versus the pop shield maiden phenomenon?
Can we Rob, get a gift?
Go ahead. No, Nick had a note at the bottom. I'm sorry. It wasn't for public reading, I guess.
Oh.
Tell us your thoughts, Rob.
Well, I mean, from a purely archaeological standpoint, the whole shield maiden thing isn't really supported. Um, you know, but I mean, if you read some of the sagas, women were right there on the battlefield, encouraging the men. And in the saga, I think it was Saga of the Greenlanders, one woman, when the men were faltering, got in front of them and, spooked the natives away. Um, there is courage in femininity. And honestly, these days, I think for women to be feminine is courageous in modern society. That alone is an act of courage, in my opinion, because all the popular culture is telling them to do otherwise.
You know, I it's courageous to be authentic, and something that I've seen in almost every incarnation of it. Um, Whenever I have seen a woman that pretends to be a shield maiden or talks about how much of a Valkyrie and a shield maiden and whatever she wants to say that she is, I know to some of us at first it can become very off putting, but on further examination and getting to know some of those ladies, it is and 100% of the time, this is what I've seen, it is a mask to hide inherent brokenness and inherent weakness. The women that I've known that have pretended so hard to be shield maidens are the weakest people. And I don't mean that insultingly. I mean that in a pitiful way. They're people that are very, very broken inside, and this is a persona they can take on to distract themselves from inadequacies that they feel. And I think that facing those things and overcoming inadequacies is much, much more courageous than pretending to be somebody that you aren't. Rob mentioned that being feminine in today's world is courageous because the people out there in society so often now want to completely twist and distort the image of our women to make them something they're not. It's as if the only way they can have value is by pretending to be men, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Are women that live femininity and embrace their femininity, embrace their roles as wives and as mothers and as grandmothers. Those women are very courageous. The ability to tell truth to men, to encourage them to act right and to do the right things when maybe they would falter, is historically one of the best ways that women have exhibited courage, is by holding their men to account to make sure their men acted honorably and acted courageously rather than, shirking their responsibilities. Women encouraging that and instilling that in our young men, it means everything, and it's so very important. It will be a great day when our women stop with this shield maiden nonsense and can be truly proud of who they are and their inherent value. And I want to see them have that. And the more women in the AFA that I've watched develop that and hold their heads high as beautiful women, it's really special to see. And I look forward to seeing more of that. So Green Leader asks, what are some of the states under consideration for Hoffs after Phrasehoff? So first and foremost, Sigerheim is going to be in Tennessee, and Sigerheim is going to be the home of Tiershoff. So that's the next one coming up after Phrasehoff. After that, we'll really have to see. It depends on what time that is and how that develops. We need members in those areas or within driving area of wherever strategically we want to put those subsequent Hoffs. We also need Gothar to officiate ceremonies and to lead those Hoffs. And it's going to depend where those people show themselves. If you would have asked me this question, a few years ago, Njordshof, there was a very real possibility of it being in Texas or so when we were considering Njordshof, Florida was there, Texas was there, and coastal Washington was there. And we really considered all of those places. And fortunately, it turned out that we got it in Florida, and I think that was the best place for it. When we get to Braggishof, which is going to be the one after Tiershof, we'll just have to see where that shapes up and where we have Gothar that are going to be located to make that work. Just geographically, if we weren't considering Gothar, it would be very nice to have a Hof in Texas. It'd be very nice to have a Hof in the Pacific Northwest. It'd be nice to have a Hof maybe further up the East Coast in Massachusetts. But those places aren't ready right now. It's always because I'm from Alaska. It's always been kind of a dream of mine to have Uhler's Hof be in Alaska, but we'll see if we're there by the time we come to it. We're pretty much starting from scratch up there, unfortunately. So that's kind of the broad strokes of where we're at with that right now. So getting back to the question I asked earlier from Shannon, you're in luck. If you're thinking of moving to North Carolina, then you'll be moving right next to Thorshof. And you also said you're considering Tennessee. If you go to Tennessee, Tiershof will be there shortly. So sounds like you've got a lot of good options on your plate. Sierra asks, loving the stash, Grossmeister. A lot of people are fans of Rob's impressive mustache. Why is it called Winter Nights during this time of the year? Rob, do you have the answer to that question?
I'll take a stab at it. Well, in our homelands, it's already cold. It's the beginning of winter. It's the end of harvest and the beginning of winter. And ancestrally, our folk only had 2 seasons, summer and winter. That was it. So really, this Winter Nights is the beginning of the winter season.
Yeah, so Rob's absolutely right. It's an old Norse word, something our ancestors have celebrated since great antiquity. It's taken different forms in different places over the years, but what Rob said is correct. It marks the beginning of the winter season. Just as kind of a point of interest from my own life, I grew up in Alaska. I mentioned that. I grew up in Anchorage. And if you draw it over across the map, it becomes at a very similar, it's parallel to Scandinavia in a lot of ways, and seasons hit similarly. And I always remember growing up, that Halloween was kind of the marker of when snow was going to stay on the ground, and we had that snow cover. As a kid, you could always look forward to that. And by Halloween, we had snow that was going to stay throughout the winter. So yeah, it marks the beginning of the winter season, and that's why it's called Winter Nights. And it was typically like a 3-night period, I believe, at the very beginning of winter. Should other varieties of white participate? Celtic pagan practice has less source material, making it less practical, which is why I would settle for German tradition. What are your thoughts, Rob?
Oh, I've got some. Please come on home. Really, it's all Aryan, right? And more very specifically, Northern Europeans are very, very similar in culture and in religion. And Celtic is part of that Northern European area, as is Slavic. And we're more similar than we aren't. And ours is, the Germanic is better attested. But any Aryan, any Aryan is more than welcome to join the AFA and worship the gods. That doesn't stop you from, honoring your Celtic deities at home, or even, I mean, really, when it comes down to brass tacks, they're the same deities by a different name, right? It's the Aryan spirituality. So you're not doing a disservice to your Celtic ancestry by worshiping them under the Germanic name. That's that's the easy answer to that question.
What Rob said. No, I've said it before on here, and I'll continue to say it. We're Pan-Aryan. We have that common root spirituality. The names and some of the specific ways that different tribes of our ancestors related to our gods formed a little bit differently. But no, that's absolutely the way to go. And I think your point on Celtic lack of source material is important. I think we have we have something here that works. We have something here that works, that speaks to our soul. We've actually, in a very real way, made those connections again with our gods, strengthened those connections through, we're about to come up on 28 years of the Asatru Folk Assembly. This is where Aryan people that want to worship our gods should be. We would love to welcome our Celtic brothers and sisters, as well as others of our race that want to come back to our gods. And I really do think that joining the AFA is their best bet for that, to get that experience. Unfortunately, Hellenic faith in a modern sense and Celtic traditions have been particularly degenerate in their modern form. And I think some of that is the childish reaction to Christianity. I think if some of it is misfits that think that's another word for other, so they don't fit in because of how pagan they are, when I think sometimes that speaks to a deeper defect going on within them personally. So I think that especially traditional minded people, if you want to reconnect with the gods, the AFA is a wonderful place to do that. Steve asks, how do you want your members to move forward with courage and use this virtue to continue building and paving the way for the AFA? Rob, go ahead and go first on that one.
I think we touched on that earlier, is just live an authentic Asatru life. Live your truth and live it out in the open. Don't hide. Be proudly in pictures. Proudly use your name. Just live a real Asatru life, and that is how you be courageous. Is just be authentic. Easy.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. The courage that we're asking for isn't big, showy courage. It's that everyday courage of being proud of who you are, being proud of us, and being proud of our gods, and being proud of the AFA. The more of our people that are good people with good families who do good things and are publicly AFA members, that builds our reputation amongst everyone. It makes it that much easier for our children and for our children's children to be proud AFA members. When folks hide, they look like they're doing something wrong because they're acting like they're doing something wrong. We're not. We're doing something right. And standing together, putting your face and your name out there and saying, hey, I'm a proud member of the AFA. That's what we want. That's what we need. And that's to a large extent why we've moved forward. The advances in the AFA have been, there's a lot of factors, and I would never discount how big of an impact our God's blessing us has been. Certainly that's the biggest factor. But on our end, having pictures of wonderful people doing wonderful things is what's bringing our folk home. They see that it's real and that it goes on in the real world with people who they can see look like great people that are smiling, that are happy, that are engaged in something spiritual. So living proud of who you are and your beliefs is what we want from our people. And it's not just what we want from our members, it's what we want for. We don't want you to have to always look over your shoulder wondering if somebody's going to discover your secret religion. No, we want you to be proud and to hold your head high and to feel confident with who you are and what you believe. And we're here for you, and we're here for each other. Looks like we lost Rob. Let's see if he pops back on. I hope he did not disappear. Let's give him just a second. All right. So while we're waiting on Rob, I guess we've got a question. Do you guys believe in ghosts and anything else paranormal? Yes, absolutely. Anything else paranormal, you'd have to be more specific. But as far as ghosts are concerned, absolutely. Now, I think there's a lot of kookiness and nonsense when people talk about ghosts sometimes, but I think there's a lot of very real things as well. Certainly, if we believe that our ancestors live on after death, then there's something there. Now, how we perceive that may be different. There's a lot of people that have a special gift to where they can see that, whereas some of the rest of us maybe can't, to where they are aware of that and they have that second sight that some of us don't possess. A lot of people who say that are nut jobs. A lot of people who say that, some of which I've met, are absolutely correct. And you can really tell the difference sometimes when you get to know some of these people. But yes, we certainly believe in ghosts in the Asatru Folk Assembly. What do you say to that, Rob? We got a question. Do you guys believe in ghosts or anything else paranormal?
100%. Without getting too far in the weeds, I've experienced it personally, and I totally believe in it. So
there you have it. I don't understand this question. Maybe you can help me with it, Rob. Why can't you mention this V2K or me? I do understand it does have to come from government because it is real. I truly don't know what that question's about. Do you understand the question, Rob?
I do not know.
I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what you're referring to. If you could help me, I'm happy to answer your question. I don't speak that though. Sierra says, what do you guys remember about the feelings when you achieved Gothar status within the AFA? Matt specifically as Alsherjargothi and Rob as Gothi. Rob, tell us about your feelings when you achieved your ordination.
Hard to put into words. One thing that happens to me personally, it doesn't happen every ritual, but it does happen at rituals. Some would describe, if you understand the awakening of the Kundalini, it's like a shot of energy up your spine and out your crown. I felt that absolutely, and immense pride that I had achieved that. And I mean, it was, I was trying not to shed tears up there, that I was so happy and so proud of that, because it means so much, to be able to do that for the church and to be instilled with that responsibility. It's hard to put into words.
Yeah, so I'm few things. I know you asked specifically about when I became Alsherjargothi, but I'd also like to mention when I got ordained as a Gothi. And I got ordained as a Gothi in 2012. at Midsummer in the Sierras, and it was at Camp Norga in Alta California. And I remember that because it was at the culmination of, I had to do an ordination bloat, and I did a bloat to Thor, and I felt it was a good bloat. I gave it my best. It exhausted me in a way that I had never been exhausted before. I had to go take a nap afterwards. It literally took all of the energy out of me. And I think that when you talk about some of these things, it sounds fluffy, and I don't want it to sound that way. And it's one of the reasons we're reluctant to talk in this language so often, is because lunatics have kind of poisoned the well. But so the Latin word for priest is pontifex, is the bridging mankind to the gods. And that's it's a very apt description. You are as a Gothi, it's your job, if you do it right. And lightning doesn't always strike. Sometimes you have an amazing bloat, and sometimes it's all right. But when everything's on, and when you're talking and the gods are listening, you're transmitting very literally energy from us through you to the gods, from the gods through you to the rest of us. And if you do that right, it's a very, very powerful thing, and it has a physical effect. And I felt it so much that day. It was a very, very special day, and I'll always remember that. When I became Alsherjargothi, that was more of a process. So I became Alsherjargothi at midsummer of 2016. And on the day itself, there was a lot going on. It was bittersweet. It was a day where Steve was stepping down and stepping aside, and I was stepping forward, and there's a lot of feelings there. It was a real significant transition. But like I said, it was bittersweet. It was sad to see that change, but also overjoyed that I was able to be put into that position. It was trying to think of the words to put to the emotion of it. It was passing through a threshold. It was, okay, now what do I do? What does Matt's administration look like? And at that point, I was able to try to set a tone for what my leadership of the AFA would look like, of things that I wanted to emphasize then and in the future, and of kind of where I wanted this all to go. And so it was really special that way. And I remember a couple of things from that weekend. It was my first event at Odinsoff. And I remember sitting at the head of the tables that we had set up. And the way it's positioned where I was sitting, you could look down the length of the hall and out these beautiful wooden double doors that we have that go out into the world. And it was at sunset, just around, it wasn't quite sunset, but the sun was going down to where it's got that just really pretty light on all of the greenery and all of the trees and all the things outside. And I could sit there at the head of this table, and I looked down the entire length of this Hoff, And I saw all my folks sitting there at the table, eating and laughing and celebrating together. And I looked through the length of all of our people, and then out into the world, out into this beautiful green shining world that was so bright outside because the lights were dimmed inside. I think the lights were off inside because we still had enough ambient light to see, but it was this homey thing inside. And then you looked out into the brightness of the world, and that was profound to me, looking from that perspective at the head of this table out into the world, out into our future. And I remember that really stuck with me from that weekend. But the feelings on that were a little bit different. As I've also said on the show, I kind of started doing Alsherjargothi stuff just after Ostara of that year. And, it took those 3 months there of transition time, but I had the time, so it wasn't such an immediate thing. I had the time to ease into that role and ease into that position, at least behind the scenes there. So those are my thoughts on that. We're down to the last 3 questions, just about 2 hours in. If you guys have any more questions, we would be very happy to answer them for you. And if you don't, we'll finish up with these 3. Amanda, what do you think happens to our Christian ancestors when they pass? Since they are our folk, do they go to Helheim or do they go to the Christian heaven? While pursuing Asatru may connect me to my ancestors far in the past, I'm concerned that I may lose a connection with my immediate ancestors in the afterlife. What do you have to say on this, Rob?
I don't believe that Yahweh is powerful enough to separate you from your blood. I believe that even our Christian ancestors, they're in for a little surprise when they die. I have no doubts in my mind whatsoever that the people that I've loved in this lifetime that are no longer with me, I will see again. I don't believe that the folk soul is separatable by a foreign god, and I think our blood is stronger. I do believe that we have 1,000 and more years, depending on what part of Europe you're from, of Christian ancestry, and those people don't just suddenly stop caring about their blood. And I think they were surprised when they passed and they saw their other ancestors in Helheim. But I think it was still a happy homecoming, and I think that's what will happen, is that we will not be separated from our Christian ancestors. There's no way.
Yeah, I've got to follow along with that. I believe in the validity of, a lot of other racial spiritualities as relates to those races of people. But the claim by the Christian God, at least as expressed in their Bible, that, he has say over all of these things and is universal for everything, I don't think that's true. Things either are true or they aren't. I think in the afterlife, we will have a lot of these things clarified. And I think a lot of us will learn many different things. But I truly believe that our Christian ancestors will have a lot of things spiritually and metaphysically to sort out. Absolutely, I believe that they'll go with the rest of our ancestors to Helheim, and be part of that great ancestral homecoming. I believe that we will see them and connect with them on the other side. It's easy to ask that question from an afterlife standpoint in that sense, but when you think about it and you break it down, we interact with our ancestors through practicing Asatru all the time. We invite our ancestors into our bloats. Every bloat I do, I invite the ancestors to be there and to share with us. At Desir bloat, we call upon our female ancestors, and almost every single one of us calls upon a Christian Desir to speak to and to commune with, because that's been the default position of our people for so long. But those ancestors hear us, and they interact with us through Asatru, and they even, appear to us and become manifest there to us during an Asatru ritual. And that's not the magic of the Christ God. That's ours. Most of the ancestral veneration that we do in today's practice of Asatru is towards folk that were Christians, towards our fathers, mothers, grandfathers, grandmothers, great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers. Like Rob said, for most of Europe, for 1,000 years or more. We have a very strong connection with those ancestors, and they exist. Whether they believe in our afterlife or not is irrelevant. It's true and it exists, and they're part of that. Whether they embrace it or don't embrace it is not the point of relevance. And I don't think that the God of the Bible gets to just pick up and snatch people out of their different indigenous afterlives to make up his heaven. I don't think it works that way. And if you go back far enough, the Jewish people didn't think it worked that way either. The more you learn about their spiritual tradition, the change from Judaism to Christianity was really profound change in just the understanding of that God. And initially, early what you would call Judaism to late, I guess, first century Judaism is very, very different. Originally, Yahweh was one of many ethnic gods of the Jewish or the Semitic peoples. And that changed over time too. So I think that there's the truth in there is that God doesn't get to determine where my ancestors go or don't go. They go back to our ancestors and our people. And I believe very strongly I've come to such a better connection and have such a better relationship with my ancestors from practicing Asatru than I ever had when I was a Christian. And I feel that's the case for everyone who I've ever talked to about this with. So I wouldn't let that worry you. I think that if you fully embrace it and reach out to your ancestors in ritual, really special things will happen for you and for them. I thought we had more questions than we did because one of them got mixed up, but we do have a few more coming in. I say mixed up. There's only Nick's got to split the questions if they're too long in the question box. So sometimes I see them as two questions. So if I mess up reading your question, sometimes that's why, or at least that's what I'm gonna blame it on. Any suggestions for an Asatru Halloween? Rob, what are your suggestions for an Asatru Halloween?
Well, I mean, my religious practice for this time of year takes place at winter nights. As far as secular Halloween goes, I mean, it's probably my favorite secular holiday. I love scary movies. I don't know. It's a little irreverent, I guess. Maybe I'm going as Father Marin, and my daughters are going as little demons. Yeah, I think that's funny from The Exorcist. If you're not familiar, who Father Marin was, pea soup, spinning head. Yeah, I love scary movies and taking the kids out. We always do a theme. When my oldest daughter was little, she was Elsa and I was Sven from Frozen. We always do like a little family theme, which is kind of cool and fun. So, yeah, I get my religious stuff done at winter nights, and then when secular Halloween comes around, it's just fun.
Yeah, what Rob said. Religiously, we celebrate and observe winter nights. Uh, do fun Halloween stuff. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing fun Halloween stuff. Uh, Go out there, get candy. If you do, we insist upon the dad tax. A portion of that candy goes to the father. That's just understood. We need to enforce that. Um,
Age old custom.
it is. And who are we to argue with that? Yeah, just thinking back on it, and not that you guys necessarily care about this or not, that was always the coolest thing that we ever did at school. Was our school had the Halloween carnival, and man, that was so much fun. We would go there. We'd look forward to that every Halloween, and you'd go there, and the whole elementary school, each of the different classrooms had different little games and stuff where you got these little prizes. And the best thing, the big win, was the cakewalk, because everybody would bake all these cakes and have them in there, but very few of the kids wanted to do the cakewalk. So you played this musical chairs and you get cakes. You could be a second grader and go home with 3 full cakes if you played your cards right from the cakewalk. So that was where the big loot was. But yeah, no, Halloween can be really fun, and it's a neat time. It was a really special time, I remember, with my dad, because my dad would take me out trick-or-treating. And at that time, man, I miss this because you hardly ever see this anymore. At that time, in our neighborhood, in any neighborhood, from sundown till about 8 at night, 9 at night, it was just thick with kids and families and people out trick-or-treating. And it was a really special thing for the community. You got to know your neighbors a little bit. I have very, very fond memories of Halloween growing up. So I hope that our children get to experience some of that. I know it's a little bit different world today, and there's a lot of indoor, trunk or treat different things, but go out and have fun. That's what we're intending to do with my daughter. And I hope you guys do the same, but remember the dad tax, it's the thing. Sierra says, how do you incorporate Asatru into your daily life with your children, Rob?
Well, we pray. I'm a big believer in prayer. We have an ancestor altar right by the door, and we talk to the ancestors regularly. My decor is Asatru. There's Mjolnirs and runes and family crests and cuckoo clocks and all kinds of cultural stuff. But it's just so ingrained into our lives, we don't even really think about it. My daughter will talk about the gods, not abstract, but just like any child would, like as matter of fact. It's not an abstract. It's not a, I think this is how it is. It's no, the gods are there, which is awesome. She's grown up in the faith. Really, it's just simple things like blessing the meal before we eat and talking to our ancestors daily. My girls really like coming to my altar, and I've got my youngest, she's only 2.5. So, she likes ringing the bell. She likes, beating the drum, but my oldest, she really likes lighting the incense and saying the prayers and being reverent. She's really come into that lately, and that I couldn't be prouder. So yeah, it's just normal everyday stuff. Really, you don't even think about it anymore. It just happens.
Absolutely. Okay, another question. I recently had a concern that I brought up with Gothi Lane. My mother was adopted. Her adopted father was adopted. I was worried that the most influential people in my life would be separated from me. I assume that's in the afterlife we're talking about. Do you have any thoughts about that, Rob?
Yeah, I believe this may have come up before, but you can, with an open heart, reach out to your ancestors, and you don't have to even have a name for them. Just reach out and they'll find you. spiritually. They know who you are. You may not know their name, and you may not have a picture of them, but they know who you are, and they will. If you reach out to them, they will, reach back, and you can have a relationship with them that way. Um, and you can always, if you do a DNA test or whatnot, and you see where the countries from Europe that you hail from, and you can look up some very general ancestors. And the neat thing about genetics is it's not a funnel. I mean, it waves in and out. So like they say, everybody's related to Charlemagne, right? That's what they mean, is that because it was long enough ago and Charlemagne was prolific, many of us can claim descent from Charlemagne. So you can look up old personage from your ancestral country, and chances are you're related to them. So you can pay honor to them that way. But in general, I would just open your heart and pray, and your direct ancestors will find you.
So, I think there's what Rob said, and then I also have to think there's nothing suggesting that the only people you can interact with on the other side of the veil are your direct kinfolk. It's one of those, we'll know when we get there, but there's no reason to think that at that point you can't interact with other people in your life who've meant a lot to you. Our conversation earlier about believing in ghosts, and if we believe that when you approach the altar and speak to your ancestors, that they hear you. Certainly we toast heroes and friends of ours that have departed at Sumble, and we believe that they hear us. So if they can hear us, then certainly, it would make sense to believe that perhaps they can interact on the other side of the veil as well. It's said that certainly in the halls of the gods that people of different, from different families interact with one another. So I see no reason to believe that's any kind of a hard no in those interactions. Now, perhaps if they were of a completely different race, I'm not sure the people that raised you, if they were Africans or they were Chinese or something, then that may be a very different case. But assuming that there are other Aryan peoples, there may very well be ways to interact with them in a very real way when you're on the other side of the veil. That's one of those things that'll be great to find out when we get there. All right. Birds or cats? We must settle this once and for all. For food or for pets is the question I have.
Well, I have chickens and I have cats, and I love my chickens, but not as much as I love my cats. But I'll eat the chickens and I won't eat the cats.
I think it depends on the cuisine, on which lends itself better. If we're talking about pets, if the choice is birds or cats, I got to go with cats. I also feel bad for pet birds. I hope this doesn't offend anybody in the audience, but it would be really unfortunate to be a bird and not fly. So if you're a pet bird and you don't get to actually go out and fly around, I feel really bad for that. I would eat that bird just so they didn't have to go through a life without flying. What's your favorite scary movie? Rob, what's your favorite scary movie?
Ooh, that's a hard one. There's so many good. Oh man, now my brain is turning to mush right now. I can see the movie playing in my head. It's not a traditional scary movie. It's art house, and it's pretty cool. It's very gory. It's called The Green Inferno. I enjoyed that. Let's see. One of my favorite ones from a kid, and it sounds silly, and watching it now, it is kind of hokey, but I always liked Children of the Corn. The little guy with the hat, just when you were a young kid, scared the the creeps out of you. And it's escaping my mind. I don't know. for whatever reason. But the one with Ed and Lorraine, there's a house that's haunted with they come to get it out. It's big family that lives there. I'll you know what, I'll think of it as soon as the podcast is over. But
so mine, and I don't want to endorse this because I don't think that slasher movies are particularly good or noble or whatever, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, really, really creeped me out. And it would still creep me out today if I sat and watched it for a number of reasons. But one of it is just it wasn't supernatural. It wasn't hard to conceptualize. It could technically happen. And it was filmed in grainy old 1970s style filming, which just made the whole atmosphere that much more creepy. And Leatherface himself is just terrifying with his creepy moans and wails and stuff. Give you a bonus, not proud of this one. As a small child, I was terrified of Fraggle Rock. I'm deadly serious. Everything about that show creeped me out. I remember hiding behind our coffee table when they'd go into like up into the world or whatever, and there's the giants. I would literally hide from those giants behind the coffee table. That show creeped me out so bad. I vividly remember being terrified of that. Oh, okay. So second bonus, also something that used to terrify me, not necessarily relevant. Unsolved Mysteries was absolutely terrifying. And they did a Halloween episode when I was a kid. But because all of the things on there were real, they were things from the news. It was very authoritative. It was, newsworthy stuff. But then they did, some paranormal ones too. They'd splice in there sometimes. And as a kid, you don't quite understand how to separate the wheat from the chaff on it. Yeah, they did one, and it was about werewolf sightings or something. And as a kid, because again, this is a real news program, it was terrifying. And I remember that to this day. Also on that show, they did one on Bigfoot, and they did it right before I was supposed to go on a Cub Scout camp out. And they did this Bigfoot show and like really got it in my head. And the next day I was supposed to go camping in the woods. And that also creeped me out and stuck with me.
That music alone was good to send shivers down your spine.
Absolutely. And Robert Stack is awesome. Just his voice and his whole presentation of that show was amazing. What would you say to the Christian identity people who claim Jesus was white? Whites are the real Jews, etc. So it's an interesting question, and I think there's a nuance to it. I have no idea what I would say to those people because that belief is so absolutely on the face of it absurd and ridiculous. But if it's a sincerely held belief by those people, I truly am not sure exactly how I'd approach it or what I would say. It just is so obviously not true. And it is sad to me because it reeks of such desperation to co-opt, and I don't think it's done mean-spiritedly. I think there's shades of this a little bit in Alexander Rudd Mills, who I spoke of earlier, his works. And there was a time when our people didn't know anything else but Christianity, to where they would try to marry the two things and make things fit. And I think Christian identity tries to do that in some kind of an unhealthy way, to reform a square peg to fit a round hole. But it's really sad and desperate to me that they would take another race of people's gods and try to pretend that we were the same just because reasons. It's such a leap, and it willfully is defying any kind of common sense in such a big way. I'm not sure the best way to have that conversation with somebody who is in the throes of a sincere belief with that. Do you have thoughts on that, Rob?
Pretty much the same. Honestly, I think it's a need to Aryanize the familiar. So they don't want to step out of their comfort zone that their family, that they grew up with, the faith that they grew up with. So rather than staying true to the actual Semitic roots of the faith, they have to change it to make it somehow ethnic and somehow fit in with their worldview. And I don't think it really works. And again, like you said, you don't want to defend if that's their real, sincerely held belief. It's hard to really talk about that in a meaningful way. I don't know either, honestly. In the words of Gen Z, it's a cope.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Cliff says, so we're talking about courage. Can each of you share a moment in your life in which you wish you were more courageous or that you regret you were not courageous? Do you have any off the top of your head, Rob?
Yeah. And there's a few, and I guess one I'll speak about because it is something that haunts me to this day, and I've never really shared it with anyone. But when I was a teenager, I was just 18, and my Opa that I've spoken about before, he was passing away, and I didn't handle that as well as I should. Instead of confronting, I said my goodbyes and whatnot, but I didn't stick around. I immediately joined the military and left. And I think I could have handled that a lot better. And I could have been more courageous about that. Instead of facing my feelings and being there, I left. And I regret that greatly. I wish I had the courage to have faced that better.
I appreciate you sharing that. It's going to sound silly, but I remember it because it stuck out to me so much because it happened when I was a kid. I can't remember how old I was, but I was at Camp Gorsuch, this Boy Scout camp in Alaska. And there was this rappelling thing we were all doing. And it was a really large rock thing. It wasn't like a cliff or something huge. It was like a really big rock. It was like, I don't know, 40 foot high or something. Nothing, shocking. But I was terrified and I couldn't do it. And a bunch of the other kids did it. And my dad was there and I was so embarrassed that I was too scared to go down that. And it's silly because I know better, but I regret that and feel bad about that to this day. On a side note, but kind of partially, an interesting story that just came to mind was something that Rob said. When my grandfather passed, my uncle and I had a troubled relationship. He was a very severe alcoholic, and we just had a lot of things that we struggled with when I was in high school. But my grandfather, when he passed, my uncle would disparagingly say that I was cowardly, that I didn't go and look at his dead body after he'd passed. And that wasn't the case. That was never something that was offered to me. I didn't do that consciously, but what I did make sure to do is when my uncle passed, I made very sure that I went there and did a viewing of the body and stood with him and viewed as he went into the crematorium. So not that that's either here or there. It's just an interesting thing I thought of when something came up that I thought of on it, because it was, referred to I guess, irreverently afterwards, but not intentionally so, is taking the dead body challenge, is, being willing to go be there when that was something like that was the first and only dead person that I've ever seen. Shay asks, what costume will y'all wear this Halloween? Rob, you got a costume picked out?
Yeah, I already spoke of it. From The Exorcist, I'll be Father Merrin, and my children are being little demons.
I will not wear a costume because I don't have a clever, creative idea for a costume, and I don't think that my 2-year-old daughter will care too much whether I'm in costume. But I do plan on consuming as much Halloween candy as I can find from her winnings, I guess. So, but we are going to go around and do a bunch of different trunk or treat things, and hopefully we can go around our neighborhood if enough people are doing it. Otto says, Rob, what boat were you on and what profession? I was a nuke EM on the USS Sturgeon.
I was on the San Francisco, and I was a sonar tech.
We need a cakewalk at a national event, please. Yes, we absolutely need cakewalks at national events. Let's do this. Anybody listening to this? Let's make that happen because that's awesome. Josh says, what do either of you gentlemen do personal things to connect with ancestors this time of year? Any personal or family traditions? Rob, do you have any of those that you want to share with folks?
Just attending the This Year Bloat at Winter Nights has become a big one. We haven't missed a Winter Nights in years and don't plan on it. I like to tell stories to my kids of my grandparents to keep their memory alive. Pretty easy stuff.
Stuff at home I'm trying to think of in a family way. I always show my daughter pictures of our ancestors, and if she shows interest in one or points at one, I tell her who it was and what I know of them, and any stories about them if I know them. Like Rob said, I've been fortunate enough. We had our 11th Winter Nights this year, and I've been to every one of those Winter Nights in the eastern part of the country there, every AFA National Winter Nights. That's always a big thing in my personal life. Winter Nights is where I met my wife, Mandy. And so I do that. And as far as interacting with ancestors, I always call on my grandmother, my mother's mother, Mary Ann Davis, at the Desir Bloat. And I've had really, really profound experiences with that at Winter Nights. And so it's kind of the stuff I do. Other stuff, it's starting that time of year that that hospitality is really focused on. And I host a dinner at my house every month. So it's not like it's, only during the quote unquote holidays that I do it. But I have my grandmother, the same grandmother I just spoke about, I have her picture hanging up in my kitchen so that, we can look to her while we're preparing those meals for people. Because at this time of year, around Christmas and Thanksgiving time growing up, that was such a big thing for her to host that at her house and to show hospitality to all of our family. All right. Can you please list all the noble virtues in addition to courage? I really love this conversation. Living nobler lives is the antidote to despair. Absolutely. Courage, truth, honor, fidelity, discipline, hospitality, self-reliance, industriousness, perseverance, and victory. And we're going to do shows like this about each of those topics. And I'm glad that you see the value in trying to live more noble lives. And I hope all our folk become inspired by that, and through doing that, inspire each other to be a little bit better tomorrow than we are today. Pie season is upon us. Favorite pie? Rob, what's your favorite pie?
Oh, well, I'm going to be honest, my favorite's kind of basic. I like apple pie, and I like key lime.
I like cherry. I like grasshopper, and I like blueberry. Blueberry pie filling, though, is kind of gross. Like, I like cherry pie filling pie. Blueberry, I like a lot better if it's made from real blueberries. How do you explain Asatru to friends, and maybe try to suggest why they should convert also? What do you think on that? How would you explain Asatru to friends, and in a way that would suggest for them to convert, Rob?
It's kind of hard. All my friends are true, but that hasn't always been the case. And I have work. Actually, I had a kind of friend at work who, he was kind of familiar. He was into black metal, and he knew who Burzum was and whatnot. So he kind of, he'd heard of it before, but when I tried to talk to him about it, give him my card and whatnot, he's like, "No, dude, I don't believe in anything." So it's like, all right, well, it's not worth my time. But like I said, the problem is now is all my friends are off the truth, so I don't have to convert them. But once upon a time, I mean, the big selling point is this is your blood, this is your birthright, this is what you were born to. It's everything good about us. Why wouldn't you want to be part of that?
Absolutely. Rob and I suffer from a similar problem that way. Pretty much all of my friends are Asatru and are AFA members. Talking about how we would explain it to them, that's presupposing, I guess, in my mind, that they've inquired about it. And hopefully the first initial step to that is they see what an impact it's had on your life, because you're living nobly, you're finding success, you're being victorious in your life. Your world is better because you're Asatru. So hopefully they're inquiring in that regard, or they've at least noticed that. And I think that's a good place to start. I think ancestor worship is also a great place to start. Likely most people, no matter whether they are Asatru or not, have tried to speak to their ancestors in a prayerful moment. That's very common to the human condition. And we embrace that and celebrate that, connecting that to the blood, like Rob said, to where this is where you belong. This is what's built for your soul. And then some of it is inviting them to, like, hey, how about you come check it out? See what you think. Some of it is that invitation and that opening to the door to where they don't need to go in 1 second from complete unfamiliarity with Asatru to zealous Asatru practitioner. That doesn't have to be a one-step process, but giving them the opportunity to see it in practice and to see the effect it has on other people. Something I think is a really powerful selling point is when people go to these things and they see how seriously the rest of us take it. They see our reactions, and that in a way makes it real for them, or at least opens a door for it to become real to them. Does the AFA accept white people who know they have some non-white ancestors? So here's the thing, and I know that we have purists out there that may in their personal life take a different stance than this. The AFA standard is, and always has been, and always will be, if people look white and they present themselves as white and they don't tell us any different and they don't look different, then that's good enough. There's any number of people that are not 100%. Some of that, unfortunately, is just the case. But the biggest things that come to that are the group impact and the group disruption. If Elizabeth Warren, who's 100% white, came there and tells everybody, that she's a Cherokee princess, we can't have that. That disrupts the group, and it takes what is us and makes something other. And we don't want that in our religious practice. If somebody goes there and does have some different ancestry and goes around talking about, whatever that other is not us, and it creates division and dissension, and it takes it from homogenous to not homogenous. So the group disruption is unacceptable. But yeah, we don't dig around in everybody's ancestry. If you look white and we recognize you as us, then you're us. And I know it's not as scientific as some people like, but it's real. It's how our ancestors identified us. It's how everyone identifies us. Is you check it out, give them the smell test, no, that looks like us, that's us. May not be the perfect answer people want, but it's the real answer. What is your favorite horror book and author? Rob?
I really haven't read a whole lot of horror books. I read some Stephen King when I was in the Navy, when I was on deployment, just because they were plentiful and available. So that's mainly what I read. Horror as a genre, as far as books goes, hasn't really been something I've really been into. Like I said, Stephen King is really the extent of that, and it was available and a lot of it.
I don't read a lot of fiction. I don't read any fiction now, and I didn't used to read a lot of fiction. Can't think of any specifically horror stuff I've read, except for I've read some short stories by H.P. Lovecraft. And I came about that because of his association with Robert E. Howard, and I was a big Robert E. Howard fan. So a couple of Lovecraft's things I'd have to say, but again, that wasn't my genre, and it wasn't really something that I've ever paid much attention to. Can you explain the importance of the Einherjar and how the AFA ties them into Veterans Day? Rob, take a shot.
Well, the Einherjar are the slain warriors that are chosen to go to Valhalla. Of course, Freya gets the first pick to go to Folkvanger, but the Einherjar are those slain warriors that are, and this is a little bit of personal belief here. I don't think that the soldier that is crouching and pissing himself and gets killed by a mortar is going to Valhalla. I also don't think the old master warrior that is so good that he lives to old age and dies as an old man, but he was the absolute pinnacle of warriorness. And I think he can be of use in Valhalla. So again, that's a little bit of personal belief there. But they are the slain, according to the lore, they're the slain warriors that go to Valhalla and feast, and it's an ascension. And I don't remember who said this, that the blood of the warrior is more precious than the prayers of the pious. It's kind of that in that vein. It's like a fast track ticket to ascension to the realm of the gods, demigod, if you will. And they're important because they train and fight in the last battle at Ragnarok.
So I think this is really important that we get this question on the show where we talk about courage. There's not a great amount of attestation in lore, and yes, it talks about them in terms of battlefield slain. But like Rob said, there's distinction there. It's hard to believe that, you know, somebody who isn't in the heat of something courageous but happens to die in some kind of a war zone gets a ticket there, but the greatest warrior ever in the history of warriors that makes it to old age doesn't get to go. I don't think it works like that. And I also don't presume that, only slain warriors get to go there. I'm not going to tell the Allfather who he can invite to his table. But in the lore, they're the warriors that are chosen to sit and to eat at the Allfather's table and to commune with Odin in a very special way and with their fellow warriors in a very special way, and to battle the forces of chaos alongside our gods. Rob's right. It's about ascension. And the ascension specifically in that instance is ascension through courage. And I think warriors, especially in that day where everything was very personal, really exemplify the ability to overcome and master oneself in the moment of conflict. And that ascension is a shortcut or a quick path to ascension and becoming more than you are, and that being recognized by our gods. And it's no mystical secret. It was put on Veterans Day by the early practitioners of Asatru in the last century for a reason, as a special time for people in Asatru to celebrate our veterans. Not claiming that those are the only people that are Einherjar or every veteran becomes an Einherjar, but that special thematic moment for us to honor our veterans is special and is honoring that service and people's willingness to overcome fear or hardship, to put themselves in literal danger and their life at risk for cause, for king, for country, for the man next to them. Their ability to do that is something that we in Alsherjargothi certainly want to celebrate. And so that's why we do that. Do you think werewolves or vampires could be real? At least I've heard of 2 places in Serbia where they say a vampire is buried. What do you think, Rob?
I don't know. Maybe. There's examples in the sagas of folks turning into wolves. Metaphysically, does the Ulfhednar turn into a wolf on the battlefield? These are long, interesting questions. What's the term? Navel gazing questions, but I don't know. Maybe. I'm sure there's a lot out there that isn't explained and that we don't know. So I guess it could be possible.
I feel like it would be wrong to say a hard no. I mean, certainly in the common conception of those things, it's fanciful. And I think that if there is any truth to any of that, it's probably not in our current understanding of those phenomenon. As Rob mentioned, the shape shifting into some animal form is spoken about in our lore in a number of different ways. I don't know. There's probably not those things out there, but I like to hold out, that bit of wonderment that perhaps there is. And it would be really interesting. And I hope that there are things out there that defy common understanding. We certainly believe that in the case of other metaphysical things. So perhaps there's something to some of that. Again, I'm not out there trying to tell you those things are real or it's a thing, but I like to hold my mind open to the possibilities. Along the lines of building courage, do y'all have any games or activities that may instill these acts through play or practice? Gambling could be one, maybe, and rock climbing another. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rob?
There's physical courage. There's plenty of games that one can engage in building that up. Rock climbing was absolutely mentioned. You know, it's with pool noodles, but our little kids had a sword battle at winter nights. I mean, to a kid, maybe getting whacked in the head with a pool noodle is scary. So that builds courage. um, as adults, there's various activities you can do, like you said. Find something that you're afraid of. If you're afraid of heights, rock climbing absolutely is a way to build courage. If you're afraid of, I don't remember what it's called, but some people are afraid of deep water. Well, find there's a famous swimming hole in Texas it's really deep. I can't remember the name of it, but I mean, there's plenty of deep water. Go swim in it. Do something that you are afraid of and overcome that fear, and boom, you've cultivated courage.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that, people are too scared because their kids are too fragile today to do. But there's a lot of things to instill courage, but more than just courage, to instill self-confidence in kids. And I think that martial arts is a way to do that. I think that boxing is a way to do that. There's a lot of stuff that kids can do that puts them at a risk of getting a boo-boo that can build that courage. You don't want to put them in a spot where they're going to be damaged in a permanent or a severe way, but just to learn that, falling down's not gonna kill you, and facing your fears, sometimes they're not as scary as maybe you perceive them to be. So I think stuff like that absolutely does. Um, but yeah, I think anything martial like that does, where there's, some contact and some risk of discomfort. I think that builds courage and it builds character all around. How would you explain Asatru to your family that is either Catholic or Southern Baptist, that you're not going to be sent to hell because you have a different religion and don't practice black magic? What are your thoughts, Rob?
Well, my family is Catholic, so I've got a little bit of experience. Luckily, my parents are very open-minded and have accepted it without any real fuss. I joke, my parents send us Yule cards, and because they don't know where to get Yule cards, they'll buy a Christmas card and they'll white Christmas out and write in Yule. Um, and I treasure that when I get that in the mail. And I think one of the biggest selling points was with my parents is, this is ancestral. This is what our ancestors did. Do you really believe that our ancestors are burning in hell for eternity? This is our history, and a big selling point was the ancestor veneration. Well, Mom, I pray to Grandma. I pray to Grandpa. How is that evil? You know, um, that really was a big selling point. Well, if I pray to my grandparents, you're saying that's evil? You know, no, that can't be evil. So that was the big. And honestly, with European Catholicism, there's a lot of paganism built into it, which they don't want to acknowledge. But I mean, every time you light a candle in the church, I mean, we do that. That was ours before it was ever a Christian thing. So, and I pointed out to my parents, interestingly, I said, all the things you love about the Catholic faith are not Christian. You should just come over. Hasn't worked yet, but I'm thinking as if I can get them at some point in time. But you know, that's how I do it.
So it's an interesting question, and I think the answer depends on how seriously those people take their faith. And this is, there's a double-edged sword to this too. The super zealous Christian that know you are in fact going to burn in hell because you do not bow before Jesus, though that is the most fundamentally opposed to my value system, a part of me certainly respects their zeal and their sincere faith. What's hard to respect, but much easier to deal with, is someone who says they're Christian, but doesn't really matter. It's not really that big of a deal. it's okay if you want to be pagan and I'm Christian and we can all get along. That's not authentic Christianity. And they're not being true to their value system, and they lack the courage to jump ship from that to something that they really believe in. And that's hard to respect, but it's much easier on dealing with in a family context and getting them to either accept you or to hopefully to come over to our belief and our values. Um, I'd say in either case, your best bet is always to be dignified, have nobility, and to win. The most attractive, and I don't just mean in a romantic sense, but in that certainly, but just with people liking you or family agreeing with you or swaying opinion, is be a winner. People are seduced by winning. If you are successful, if you have victory and success in your life, if you have your stuff squared away, even on a subconscious level, it pulls those people towards you, and it takes a lot of wind out of their sails about naysaying your faith and, you know, how silly this is or bad this is or whatever they want to say. It's hard to say that when you've got a good family, when you've got a good marriage, when you've got good children, when you've got a good job, when your life is fulfilled, when you look good, when you're doing well. You can't argue with success. It just is. And I think that's beneficial in all those scenarios. Lou asks, have either of you read On the Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche? That was the first book I've ever read that opened my eyes to European noble values, including courage and how Judeo-Christianity undermined them. Have you ever read that, Rob?
It's probably been 20 years, but yes. And you know, Nietzsche is absolutely mustache goals. The last Nietzsche work that I listened to, an audio book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Yes, I've read most of Nietzsche's stuff, but it may have been a very long time.
I have not read that book, but I'll have to check it out. I have not read a lot of Nietzsche's stuff, but I'll definitely give that a look. So that's the last question of tonight. It's been about 3 hours with you guys. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for all your wonderful questions. And to our special guest and my friend, Gothi Rob Stamm, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk with you tonight. And, once more for the record, you are a man that your entire church looks to as the exemplar of courage. So congratulations on that. And it is well deserved. All right, guys. Join us the same time next week as I talk with Witten's Fawn Harrell about Thor. And until then, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember that victory never sleeps.